Ladies and gentlemen, we are back and we're now solving equations algebraically on the back side of those blue notes. But we're going to take a look at some complex two-step equations. So first, let's talk about GEMDAS. You may have learned about GEMDAS as PEMDAS before, but we're going to talk about it as GEMDAS now, like we have been in 7th grade thus far. We use GEMDAS to simplify our expressions. Now, in order to solve our expressions, we're going to use something called SADMEG. Now take a look at the word SADMEG. Do you notice anything about it? Maybe in relation to GEMDAS? Well, if you haven't already noticed, SADMEG is GEMDAS backwards. And you got it? We're going to use, just like we talked about on our notes on the front side, we use SADMEG to solve equations because it is GEMDAS backwards. And here is our friend SADMEG. Now SADMEG reminds us that we first get rid of the friend that hangs around and then we get rid of the best friend. I'm going to talk about that and what that means in an example now. This example is not on your paper, so I just want you to put your pencil down and watch and listen. So we're going to start with the equation -9 equals 4x minus 1. So if you look here, this -1 is your constant. It's your friend that hangs around and is constantly annoying. We want to get rid of our friend so that we can tell our best friend the secret. Thinking about us as the variable. Because remember, we are trying to isolate our variable or get it alone. So in solving this equation, let's first get rid of the friend by doing the opposite operation. Well, if we look in front of the 1, we have a subtraction sign, so we're going to add 1 to both sides. We draw our lines to keep track of our work, and we end up, once we add 1 to both sides, with -8 on the left side and 4x on the right side. We can now tell our best friend, the secret. Once we've told our best friend the secret, we can complete the solving of the equation, which in this case, remember, when the coefficient, the number that's squeezed next to the variable, there's multiplication between these two. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So we'll divide both sides by 4. You'll usually divide the side where the variable is by 4 first, and then you'll divide the left side. You'll end up getting, once you do your operation, that -2 equals x. Now you'll notice that the variable is on the right side, but we can write that as x equals -2. -2 equals x or x equals -2 are both acceptable ways to write this solution. Let's move on to the examples that are on your paper. The first example is -3x plus 3 and 5/10 equals -11 and 5/10. Now you'll notice that I've already drawn my lines in, but you're welcome to draw your horizontal lines as you're going. Make sure that you always start with your vertical line underneath your equal sign. Once again, that line is there to help us keep track that we're doing the same thing on the left side that we're doing on the right side to keep our equation in balance. So first we're going to look in front of we're going to look for our friend that hangs around. We're going to look for our constant. And here our constant is 3.5. The operation in front of this constant is a adding or a positive sign. So in order to cancel out that 3.5, we're going to subtract 3.5 or 3 and 5/10 from each side. Once we complete that operation, we'll have -3x on the left and we'll have -15 on the right. We now have our coefficient, the number that's squeezed next to the variable, on the left side and -15 on the right side. Remember, the operation between the coefficient and the variable is multiplication, so we're going to divide by -3 on the left and divide by -3 on the right to get that x equals 5. Now this is great, but remember we need to check to see if our answer is correct. So let's go ahead and check our work, substituting in when x equals 5. So we plug in for x with 5, And we end up seeing that negative 11 and 5/10 equals negative 11 and 5/10. Yes, we are correct. Now, if you did not get that negative 11 and 5/10 equals negative 11 and 5/10, if you got something else on your left-hand side where you substituted in your solution, then that means that you did something wrong and you would have to go back and redo your solving. All right, let's move on to example number 2. Example number 2, just like we mentioned in the first example, you need to look in front of the term to determine the inverse operation. Well, if we look here, your first instinct may be to subtract negative 9. But think about it. If we subtracted negative 9, we would get negative 18 over here. We wouldn't have canceled out our negative 9. So it is very important that we look in front of the term, in front of this constant, and we see that there is a negative sign. So if we add 9 to this side, we'll get that negative 9 plus 9 equals 0, rather than a larger negative number. So whatever we do to this side, we added 9 over here, we'll add 9 to our right side. Once we complete that operation, we get y divided by negative 2 on the left, 23 on the right. Remember, this line means division. Think to yourself, what's the opposite of division? If you're thinking multiplication, you are correct. Multiply the left by 2, multiply the right by 2. We're left with y equals 46. Now go back and check your work. Great job. Now here's the work for you, making sure that you have gotten 14 equals 14. Let's move on to example number 3. Now with example number 3, it's a little bit more complex. And I know that I haven't talked about our friend Sad Meg here yet, so I'm really going to pull her in here now. So I talked about earlier how Sad Meg is GEMDAS backwards. So if we look here, this S stands for subtraction, the A stands for addition, the D for division, the M for multiplication, the E for exponent, and the G for groupings. So if we look here, you might be tempted to add 4 to both sides right away. But if we look at Sad Meg here, we're not going to do our subtraction first because this top part here is considered a grouping. And you'll notice that grouping is the last thing that we do when we're solving equations. So if we look at Sad Meg, the other operation aside from grouping that we have in this equation right now is division. Well, the opposite of division is multiplication. So we're going to multiply both sides by 3. If you need to go back and watch that over again, do that now to understand why we've multiplied both sides by 3. If not, I'm going to move on. So once we multiply both sides by 3, we're then left with negative 6 equals x minus 4. Remember, this x minus 4 was our grouping on the top. We then continue solving like we solved our simple one-step equations before. And we're going to add 4 to both sides, end up with negative 2 equals x. Now to make sure that we've done this complex problem correctly, we're going to go back and check our work. So we're going to substitute for x, negative 2. We discover that negative 2 equals negative 6 divided by 3. We get that negative 2 equals 2. Yes, our answers are equal. We know that we have this problem correct. All right, let's move on to our last example. Now this example, example 4, is special because it includes a very spooky ghost, our ghost 1. Now you'll notice that there is no number in front of the variable. There is no coefficient next to the variable. So when there is nothing next to the variable, we know that our friend, Ghost 1, is there. So if you on your paper want to go ahead and draw a little 1 in there, to remember that there is a 1 stuck to that variable x. Now I've talked about our friend Sad Meg in the last slide. And in the last slide, we also talked about, or the last example, excuse me, we also talked about how important it is to look in front of the constant or to look in front of the term to determine what inverse operation we're going to do here. So if we look here at this 8 over here, there's no negative sign in front of this. So we know that this is a positive 8. And the opposite operation when we've got a positive 8 is going to be to subtract it. So if we look here, subtraction is going to be the first operation that we use when we are solving equations. So we're going to subtract 8 from both sides, and we're left with negative 1x on the left side and 4 on the right side. Well, the only operation that we have left is multiplication, which is between negative 1 and x. So the opposite operation of multiplication is division. So we divide both sides by negative 1, and we're left with x equals negative 4. Now, in order to make sure that x equals negative 4 is correct, we're going to check our answer when x equals negative 4. So just like we've been doing, this is the 8th check that we've now done. We're going to substitute in for x when x equals negative 4, making sure to put those parentheses in. Now, you'll notice that there is a double negative, and whenever we have a double negative, we use our jumbo plus sign. So you would get 8 minus negative 4, or 8 plus 4 after you've used your jumbo plus sign, equals 12, and 12 equals 12. This is the conclusion of the back side of your notes. If you need to go back and watch a part again, do that, or ask your teacher if you have some additional questions. Move on to your activities and keep up the hard work. Bye-bye.